Hi, I'm Paul Guppy. I am the senior researcher for the Washington Policy Center, and this is our regular update of the issues that we've been working on and a report on changes that have been made, important decisions in the world of policy that affect our lives here in Washington State. And in fact, I'm going to start off with some national news and show how it's affecting us here in Washington State. So we've all seen that the Supreme Court has wrapped up its term, the U.S. Supreme Court, and it has been putting out a series of decisions, as they do in late June, early July. And I can't go into all of them, but I'm going to hit the most important one. One friend of mine commented that it was the greatest number of victories for free market ideals that he had seen out of the Supreme Court in years. And I'm just going to hit the main one, and that is the overturning of the 1984 Chevron case. So as anyone who has had to deal with government regulations and rules knows that the Chevron case back in the 80s, the Supreme Court set a standard. They clearly made a mistake. It shows how the courts are just as fallible as anyone else in saying that if there's a dispute over what a regulation says or how a law is to be implemented, the courts have to defer to the expertise of the governing agency that put out the regulation. This has turned out to be massively frustrating for people across the country and in Washington State regarding land use, water issues, housing regulations, 1,000 other rules that we all have to live under every day, that if you want to sue in court to regain your legal rights, the courts are required to, quote, defer to the agency expertise. And a week or so ago, the U.S. Supreme Court put an end to all of that. Justice Roberts and some of the other justices had expressed concern over a number of years about the way Chevron deference, as it's called, has been playing out over the decades. He was criticized for stare decisis. You're overturning a court decision that's been in place for 40 years. Justice Roberts' response to that, in his opinion, was it's never been settled. The courts are continuing to tinker with Chevron deference. It's been changed dozens of times. One record showed that it had been cited by government agencies, more than 18,000 times over the years. So it's been constantly in flux, and Justice Roberts determined that it is unworkable and therefore needs to be revisited. The good news is that they returned the clarity of the law to Congress and the interpretation of the law to the courts. The second criticism against Roberts has been that it's a, quote, power grab. And again, as free market constitutional principles, I don't see how it's a power grab for the courts to say, we have to do our job in interpreting the law. And more importantly, it sends a signal to Congress and to state legislatures to say, when you write a law, it has to be clear. No more playing this game of having phrases that are vague and then turning it over to a government agency to fill out all the details. Our elected representatives should provide detailed guidance as to what the law says. If citizens want to challenge, they should be able to go to court. And the people who are losing power in this case is kind of the deep state. It's the regulatory agencies that operate behind the scenes. So we see this as a very positive development. We also think it will have not only the direct benefit that Washington citizens have under federal law now, but also a trickle-down effect where the Supreme Court is sending a signal to all the states that we don't want to live in a world in which citizens are expected to defer to regulatory agencies. They have to be accountable to the legislature and to Congress, and the state legislature has to be accountable to the voters. So we think that's a positive development. There was another case that was a little more obscure that went along the same lines, again, controlling agency power. The Securities and Exchange Commission had developed a regulation that said that they could punish people, in this case, bond traders and stock traders, through an administrative law judge process that was within the agency, and that people who had been accused of violations were not allowed to go to court. And the Roberts Court, again, overturned that decision, telling the Securities and Exchange Commission that it's a violation of Americans' Seventh Amendment rights. This is basic, of being able, the right to request a trial by jury after you've exhausted all your other possibilities. For a state agency to come out, or a federal agency rather, to come out and simply announce, when we accuse you of a violation or a crime, we're not going to allow you to have a jury trial. You have to do it through an administrative law judge process. And the U.S. Supreme Court struck that down. That case did not get as much attention, but if you take those two together, it shows that the law is definitely moving in a healthy direction for our democracy. Next item is to give an update, as we always do, on education and school choice. Louisiana has just enacted ESA, that usually stands for Education Savings Account. Louisiana calls it an Education Scholarship Account, but the underlying policy principle is the same. Money will now go directly to Louisiana families to decide how they want to pay for private tuition or online schooling or books or tutoring courses and things like that that are directed by the parents. And again, we do not expect that the majority of families in that state will make that option. But the fact that there's a choice indicates that education choice is spreading across the country. We are starting to notice some movement in Washington state as well. Bills have been introduced. One of the Republican leaders in the state wrote an op-ed in great detail supporting school choice. So we're starting to see movement there. But more importantly, the laboratory of the 50 states is showing over 12 or 13 states now have universal school choice, and over 20 states have some form of choice. With that kind of movement, the reactionary forces in Washington state lose little by little, and they're no longer able to maintain the facade that a monopoly public education system is working for everybody. The other case that's on the cutting edge is what Seattle is doing in announcing that they plan on closing 20 elementary schools. That will affect about half the students in the city. Lee Finna is drafting an op-ed that will appear in the Puget Sound Business Journal soon, in which she shows that that's just simply not necessary. Out of a $1.1 billion budget, Seattle has plenty of options for keeping those schools open, or, as we argue, allowing those families alternative choices as to what they want to do. We also proposed, and this was fun, that those schools could become charter schools in Seattle, another idea that drives the left crazy. But if you're closing a school down to zero, why not let those communities explore their options to keep their schools open or allow children to seek other alternatives? Another issue that I'll touch on is Pam Lewison, our agriculture expert, has provided an update on her website as to what's going on with the wild gray wolf population in the state. It was listed as an endangered species, that it's been in recovery for more than 10 years, and she gives the latest numbers on what's happening with the wolf population. So the 44 wild wolves were added to the population in 2023. There are now up to 216 animals in 42 packs, and this is well beyond the level that biologists say indicates that the species is recovering. Pam also points out, because we're all about accountability, that in 2011, there was a 10-year plan to have 15 breeding pairs, and now we have 26 breeding pairs. Most of them are located in the northern part of the state. But Pam is pointing out that if you want people to have confidence in endangered species recovery, and if it's working, then the left should agree that the species should either be delisted or to allow for more management. The wolves attack livestock, they're threatening to populated areas, and a management plan would help control problem wolves and control the population, which is growing. But the left, again, is very much against that. The other alternative model that we point to is the Colville Indian tribe, which doesn't have to operate under state or federal law. And they actually issue permits to hunters to kill a limited number of wolves during a certain season. To us, all of that indicates that this wild wolf population has recovered. It's a success. And why wouldn't you want to take credit for that? So our main point is that if you want people to support policies that help with environmental recovery, and the biology and the science shows that it's working, we're encouraging our friends on the left to admit that. We'll join them and declare victory, but why continue to fight against controls that are needed when even Indian tribes are showing that there can be common sense management? So we'll continue to work on that. Also, I've mentioned in the past the victories that we had in the last legislative session, mostly with initiatives like parental rights, police pursuit reform, a ban on state and local income tax, our number one issue. So we had major gains there. We also succeeded in stopping property tax increases, preventing a proposal to ban private health insurance in Washington state. And we're proud of all of those gains. What we see now is the trend is continuing on to the November ballot. So there will be three initiatives on the ballot to repeal the capital gains tax, to repeal the carbon energy tax, and to repeal the long-term care tax. You notice that all of those have fiscal impact. It's the reason that the Democratic leadership didn't want to deal with them during the legislative session. They pushed it all off onto the voters in November because they will, quote, cost the state money. Our research and media work is pointing out that it isn't going to cost the state a dime. All of this funding is in the future. We are trying to prevent new taxes from being levied on people in Washington state, and it will not in any way reduce the revenue or the current budget of funding of state programs. So we're doing a truth in advertising, a fact-checking dialogue and resource with the media in order to point that out. And then now a fourth initiative has been added to the ballot, or will be soon, and that is the one to repeal the natural gas ban that Jay Inslee signed in the waning hours of the legislative session. So that bill was HB 1589. It's gotten lots of coverage. One thing that we think is a success is that we've helped develop the public debate so that the other side can't deny that it's a ban on natural gas. When you read the bill, it's got 1,000 moving parts. They say that it's not a ban, that it doesn't go into effect for years, the standard kind of maneuvers that you would see in a piece of legislation. But what it all boils down to is that Puget Sound Energy could cut off people's natural gas, and they definitely won't allow it for new construction in the future. So our bottom line is, that's a natural gas ban. Let's Go Washington and Brian Haywood and the initiative proponents have taken that message to the streets, so to speak, and they have been very successful in gathering at least 230,000 signatures. July 5th was the deadline, and those will be certified by the Secretary of State. They collected over 250,000 signatures in less than 45 days. So again, we who track the dynamics of politics in the state see that as groundswell, a grassroots movement that the Democrats have tended to ignore. And whenever there's a popular vehicle that allows people to express their opinions, let's pass an income tax ban. Let's pass a parental rights bill for schools. Let's repeal Jay Inslee's ban on natural gas. It gets this massive public support. So we'll be providing more research and commentary about those to inform the public as we move up to November, and then we'll see how those come out. Also, a little bit more behind the scenes, our own Todd Myers has been filing petitions with the State Building Code Council to get them to repeal a slow-moving natural gas ban that they've had in place as being a violation of the Regulatory Fairness Act. What Todd is pointing out is the law requires the Building Council to take into account cost to small businesses, cost to homeowners, and the destruction of job opportunities in the state. None of those factors were considered, and so we are pushing through behind the scenes through the public comment process to get the building council to back off on those. We see this as all one united front. If the natural gas ban is repealed in November, we think the State Building Council will back off as well. Again, getting a democracy signal from the public that we do not want energy sources to be banned or cut off. And with that, I'll touch briefly on the great news that's, big events that are happening at the national level with the presidential race. There is definitely a shakeup going on there. The Democrats may end up with a new candidate. We're like everyone else, we're following that. But what we're interested in is how does that dynamic affect what's going on in Washington state? And we think that there will be an effect in shaking up the governor's race and possibly the U.S. Senate race with Maria Cantwell being challenged in our state as well. The reason that's important for us is we focus on policy. So if the leadership of our state is going to change in the next election, we will be ready to propose new ideas to state leaders, a new governor possibly, and a new legislature when they meet next January. We are definitely feeling rumblings, both what I mentioned from the initiative process, but also in these other races, that there's a lot of dissatisfaction in Washington state about the current state of affairs. The Democrats have controlled the governorship for over 40 years. There may be just a natural feeling that another team should be in charge. If the Republicans put up a good argument for that, you can't take anything for granted. And I think it's definitely not right for one political party to say, hey, it's our turn, as if it's automatic. They definitely need to propose new ideas to the public. But having said that, these national shakeup of the presidential race combined with our hotly contested governor's race, and then we also have a Senate race here, I think we're starting to see some effects about how the public may be thinking of moving in another direction. So we'll continue to follow that. In the meantime, I hope everyone has had a great 4th of July holiday, and I'll be back in the future with another update. Thanks.